What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Better You Project, optimizing health, hormones, and aesthetics. And today I have a repeat guest. He's one of my favorite naturopathic, he probably is my favorite naturopathic doctor that I have the privilege to call a friend, a colleague, someone that I can throw ideas with and like actually get a really good response on some just different ways of looking at things. Very analytical, super smart, engineer, needs shit, concrete, black and white. And I'm like, let's live in the gray. And he's like, oh, God. So I got Dr. Greg Jones here. He also has a podcast, so you might have heard us speak before, also on his podcast called The Optimization Academy, correct?
That's it.
Yes, okay, I thought so. And so, Greg, you ready? Today we're going to be talking about longevity.
Let's do it. I'm all about that longevity life. I'm getting
all
old.
Right.
I got to be all about it. So
let me be a hype person here for just a quick sec. 2 years ago, Greg did literally probably one of the best talks I've ever listened to on longevity medicine. And why I love listening to Greg, especially in this lecture, is Minyu sat next to me and he's like, I like that, Greg. I like the way he explains things. I like the way he gives analogies. You take, and this is like a sign of a true amazing educators. You take these very complex concepts and you're able to bring it down to such a level that Minyu, who's not medical, can actually understand what you're saying. And I think that's a really hard skill. And you and I, sit in lectures all the time and I'm like, what the hell are they talking about? So I think it's a true testament of you truly understand the content and you understand it so well, you're able to break it down in such a way that people who are non-clinical can even understand it. But you can also speak at the level where it's down to the cellular mechanism pathway. It's such a high level. And so true expert when it comes, in my opinion, when it comes to longevity medicine. So, all right. Yeah, it was real good. Okay. So first things first, let's start talking about maybe just some of the basics. Looking at what is happening in longevity as far as cellular function and what is triggering the cascades of the hallmarks of aging.
Yeah. And so I think it's important to know when we think, and I always have to start this when we talk longevity and anti-aging. So I'm a realist. Look, I can't stop you aging. We're not going to be here forever. We're not there yet, right? And so to me, it's not so much about like, hey, let's do all these things so you can live to 150, right? But it's not so much, and it's cliche, corny, and I feel like I've heard it somewhere and I've kind of made it my own kind of thing. It's like, it's not so much adding, years to your life. I want life to your years, right? I want you to be like, hey, when I'm 70, 80, 90 years old, I'm still going to the gym and I can think clear and I'm not dealing with heart disease and I don't have dementia and I don't have Alzheimer's and I don't have, all this joint pain and, all these good things. And I'm still getting freaky with the wife. I don't want to think about that visualization, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like, that's your hormone.
Health span over lifespan.
Exactly. And these are the things that we're looking at doing. And so when we think about aging, right? And so and I know we're going to get into like biological clocks and chronological clocks and all that, but when it comes down to it, age can't stop it. The clock moves, it's going, right? And so we think about these theories of aging, and there's like the genetic theory where it's like, it's predetermined, it's pre-programmed, like this is it. Your death date is already in your cards. It's there, right? And how fast you age, and your rate of aging is a matter of your genetics, right? And then there's a theory of mitochondrial dysfunction. And so we can do a whole podcast on mitochondrial dysfunction, but essentially when you look at all these, when they look at the studies of cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's and dementia and all these like chronic diseases, when they look at these, long-term studies, they all have mitochondrial dysfunction at the end. It's kind of like if you do an autopsy on a guy that's 85 or 95 years old, he didn't die of prostate cancer, but he had prostate cancer because it's just something that happens as you age, right? And then there's a free radical theory, and this is the whole reason why we talk about antioxidants, right? Is that as you gain more oxidative damage, that leads to aging, and we'll get into that more too. The fourth one is this immune dysfunction theory, right? Because as you get older, your immune system function declines, right? And you're more susceptible to diseases and autoimmune diseases. So if you have that pre-programmed, like, I've got the genetic code for autoimmune, as you get older, that immune dysfunction decreases. This is why sometimes people will be like, wait a minute, I didn't have this until I was older and it wasn't there when I was younger, right? And then last but not least, as you know, if you do a lot of hormones too, your hormones drop and, that neuroendocrine system function decreases. And so as you get less testosterone, less estrogen, less DHEA, now your heart's not protected, your bones aren't protected, you're more inflamed. So those are the big theories of aging. right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if we understand that, it's like, that gives us the blueprint. It's like, okay, I know sort of why you might be aging. And I don't really subscribe to one theory. I think it's all the theories.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Mm-hmm.
how we put them all together, right? And so just kind of getting more direct to your question. So now using that, we know that there's these certain common things that all organisms kind of experience as we age. And they're called the hallmarks of aging, right? And they're not just like, oh, you're aging, this happens. There's a specific criteria. And the big three is, one is that this is going to happen. This isn't a disease state. This is normal aging, right? This happens as you get older. If you don't do anything, this is going to happen, right? In normal aging. And let's just say if you make one of these hallmarks worse, right? Let's just say if we'll take inflammation, we'll get into it. If you do things to make you more inflamed, you're going to age faster.
Right.
But this is the really, really, really cool part, Lexi, is that this is where I put this bold highlights, lights flashing, headlights, is that it's not a hallmark of aging if you can't slow it down, stop it, or reverse it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's why I love this medicine. It's like, wait a minute, I can do something about this. This isn't like, you're not like hopeless or helpless here. We can do interventions and lifestyle changes to improve that. Right.
Right.
And if we understand that, I think that's a big piece of it. That leads to all this longevity stuff. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing that, we've been studying peptides for the last 5 years is the cellular damage that happens in the aging process triggers so many cascade of, we call it downstream effects, right? In functional medicine, we're like upstream effects and downstream effects. And I think to your point, you had mentioned, if you do an autopsy and all these things, when I talk about patients and I talk about things like, mitochondrial function and oxidative stress, NAD is another thing I talk about. And I always say, like, your brain, your heart, they burn through so much NAD because they require so much mitochondrial usage that if we can help optimize those things, reduce inflammation, support mitochondrial function, drive ATP into there, we can overall improve many of these upstream effects and downstream effects. So I think that's really, really important when, practitioners like you and me, we're building out like a longevity protocol for our patients that's customized to them. You and I look at these details, which then brings us into the next question is what are the key tests when you're tracking the biomarkers of aging?
Okay.
Or like certain lab values or things like that?
Yeah, that's a great one too, because you got to know where you are, right? And I always think about when we're having patients doing this whole longevity medicine stuff, we always talk about like, well, how do you know if it's working, right? And I used to joke, I kind of still do it. I'm like, it's working if you're still alive. There you go. You know it's working. You're still here, you feel better. But in reality there's a subjective measure of aging and there's a objective measure, right? Now, subjective, we have a little questionnaire, and I don't think a lot of my patients that are in the longevity program actually do it. It's cool. I still give it to them, right? It's just like, hey, this is what you should expect, like, hey, if the things we're doing, these interventions are working, you are going to feel more energy, better brain function, better sleep, better exercise capability. This goes into the whole VO2 max thing. Again, could be a whole other podcast about that, right? Your endurance, are you having joint pain? Like, how's your libido? How's your, how all these things that make you feel good. How's your gut health, right? But when it comes to actually like, hey, what are the markers here? There's a few things that we like to say, hey, the things that we really, really track, right? And so again, if I think about like the hallmarks of aging, I'll kind of tie them into that. I'm going to kind of just, if you're okay, I'm going to kind of go.
Yeah, do it.
Here.
Yep.
All right. So this is going to be, interrupt me because this is buckle up. It's about to get busy here. So think about when I look at hallmarks of aging, because again, I look at, okay, if this is a hallmark, how can I test it? So first one, we're going to go to high level ones. Is this genomic instability, right? And I like to think about the genomics and epigenetics, or genetics and epigenetics, right? And the way I like to explain it to patients is like, you have your genetics, right? That's mom and dad. Those are chromosomes. You get the whole 23andMe. I got 23 from mom, 23 from dad. That's what you got. So think of that as like your instruction manual, right?
Yeah. DNA sequence. Yep.
Yeah, that's it, right? Everyone's got the same, all your cells have the same DNA. It's about what genes get turned on or on to make them do heart things, lung things, brain things, all that. So you have that, and that's your genetic code. That's set. But then you have this epigenetics, right? These are these environmental toxins. These are there's good things, right? Am I working out? Am I intermittent fasting? And so he'll tell people you have this book, and then you have a ability to go in with a marker and start lining things out. And you have the ability to go in and say, hey, I'm going to put a picture here. I'm going to correct this word. Wow, there's supposed to be a comma right there. Let me put a comma right there, right? And so now that being said, that's where it's like, okay, now what does that mean for longevity? There's this concept of genomic instability, right? It's the fact that, hey, whether it be endogenous or exogenous, inside the body, outside the body, I'm causing this DNA damage, right?
Right.
And when that DNA damage occurs, this is the biggest driver of that. And again, I can go all in all about this, but I'm just going to package it into oxidative stress. And so oxidative stress, this increase in free radicals, is one of the biggest insults to that epigenome, right? And so when we look at how do you measure oxidative stress, that shit's hard because it's
so hard.
I can't count these free radicals, but I can measure 8-OHDG or 8-hydroxydeguanoside.
I was going to say 8-OHDG on the Dutch test is usually how we do it.
Yeah, exactly. And so this 8-OHDH is 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine.
I ain't going to try it, but go ahead.
Some geneticists out there like, you're an idiot. And so basically this will get upregulated when the DNA is damaged by oxidative stress. So what happens is, and I'm kind of trying to make this real simple, is like when you get this oxidative stress, when you're, having these processes that create these free radicals, they target that guanine, which is one of your DNA base codes. It just loves that. They're highly susceptible to oxidation. And then this molecule that's produced when they're damaged to 8-OHDG, you can actually measure that. Right. All right. And that can be measured in urine. There's some tests, I think they said they can do it in blood and plasma, but urine is steady, non-invasive, it's stable.
Easy.
And exactly. And if that's high, I know you have oxidative stress because I can see that because it's hurting your DNA, right? And so that's one of those good measures you can actually do, right? The other one, and this is going into some of that, biological aging, is looking at DNA methylation, right? And so, and I'm not going to go on and on and on. We'll talk about DNA because, again, sometimes I talk methylation. I'm like, watch out for DNA methylation. They're like, wait, I thought methylation was good. And there's a difference between DNA methylation and cellular methylation. I definitely want to make sure we touch on that because it can get confusing for people, right?
Yes.
And so this DNA methylation is something that can actually be, we call it more of an indirect measure because this is how we can see it's like these aging calculators, these aging clocks, right? Because if you have a ton of methylation, what's happening is, oh man, this stuff's so great, man. I can go on and on, but I don't want to get too far. I'm getting too crazy here. So people are like, oh, shut up, Dr. Jones. And so this methylation thing, so this methylation process is like, when it comes to DNA, little bit different. So essentially, when I talk DNA methylation, it's the addition of a methyl group, which is a carbon attached to 3 hydrogens. And they attach to our DNA molecules, especially at the C bases or cytosine bases, right? And so usually that methylation, it controls this process called gene expression, right? And so they can silence genes, turn off genes, right? And they can actually turn on some genes too. But the thing is, the issue is if you get undermethylated or hypermethylated, right? So you're undermethylated, maybe there's a process you need to turn on, maybe like a cancer protective cell or compound isn't turned on because you're not getting enough of that DNA methylation. But also on the same vein, if you're hypermethylating, basically you may be activating genes that can actually accelerate aging. And that's why that DNA methylation can be a good biomarker to look at your biological age, right? And that's the whole of the process right there. So that's all right, Lexi, that was one.
Okay. That's good. It's good.
So again, I've been rambling enough. So you mentioned, what are you seeing in the 8-OHDG that you're seeing clinically?
Yeah. So a lot of the women that I will see is they have, like their indican levels will be high. So indican will kind of tell me, hey, their inflammation might be in their gut. A lot of times I see that they struggle down the CYP1B1 pathway. So I'm referring to the Dutch test because this is the test that I use. And so they tend to take their estrogen and go down that 4-OH pathway, which is the quinone pathway. So then I know from a clinical perspective, I have to help their body detox. So I'm recommending things like EGCG, green tea extract, castor oil packs, glutathione, resveratrol, IV ozone therapy. So I look at it as a way that, okay, I need to help kind of guide some of the therapy, but it's one marker, right? But I have to look at some of these other markers. And so from a patient perspective, you'll get a patient and they're like, well, I want to know this. And it's like, okay, but you can't just go off of, you will never go off of just one lab value, right? You got to go off of symptoms. You got to look how this is affecting this and this is affecting this. Like I said, it's up and downstream effects. You got to see what's interrelated with all of it. So that's kind of how we use it, is a lot of times in our hormonal perspective, just because that's the one test that I have. On the flip side of it, another, kind of testing thing that we've done is we've implemented biological age calculator using something called phenotypic age. And so this actually was taught to me by one of my mentors, Suzanne Free. And so this was a very inexpensive way that we can kind of track, are the interventions actually working? So this is it's a free test. Actually, it's like on an Excel sheet is how we do it. But we don't do anything little in our practice. So in our robot that we built in our practice that helps us with transcribing labs, it also will calculate out a phenotypic age. So let me talk about some of the blood markers that we look at. And so what's great is these are really inexpensive tests. So if you're a practitioner and you're listening, these are things that you can run easily, very, very inexpensive, like on a regular serum panel. So the blood markers would be things like albumin, creatinine, glucose, a high-sensitivity C-reactive protein, lymphocytes, which I think is fascinating because as people get older, their lymphocyte count goes down. And part of that is, the thymus gland, which sits in our breastbone, is starting to shrink. We're not making as much immune modulation. And then, the risk of cancer goes up. We've got DNA damage, all those things that Dr. Jones just talked about. It all leads into, okay, now I have a marker that can help me track that. MCV, RDW. So those are things that you're going to find like on a CBC or a complete blood cell count. Some of those other things you'd find on a CMP, alkaline phos, and then white blood cell count. You also need their age and their gender. And so this has been a great test that we incorporate. And it's actually really cool to show patients like, hey, we added in 90 days of methylene blue, and this is how much it impacted that. Or, hey, I added in a thymus glandular, and it improved your lymphocytes. And then in turn, we've reduced your pheno age this many, years or something like that. People love data. People love data on themselves. And so that's one way that we do it. Another thing that I think we get asked, and I'm sure you get asked, is, there was this whole big push in the media. I think Gary Brecka was one of the guys. He's all about methylation. Like, everybody needs to check their methylation, right? And then, there's some other tests. There's something called True Age, which is another one. How do I measure my telomere? How do I measure my mitochondria? Unfortunately, when Dr. Jones and I were talking about this right before we kind of started recording, is there's not a perfect test, right? And so what we have to do is we have to look, and this is what a good clinician does, right? We're like little scientists. We have to look at the serum markers. We have to know enough about some of these things. So we had talked about the 8OH. Another thing that I learned is looking at high iron levels. So high iron levels, the way that it was kind of taught to me in the ISM is that you can almost look at it as rusting. It's like rusting on the red blood cell. And so when you have high iron levels and they ain't on iron, you got to start thinking about, okay, there's some sort of oxidative stress inflammatory marker. So if I see, and we, to be honest with you, I check all my patients' high sensitivity C-reactive proteins. Everybody gets it. It's like part of their panel, just like an A1C is part of their panel. It might start helping me dig like, okay, we got to start digging into some of this, helping them detox, helping, cell cleanup and all those other things. And a big part of that is some of the interventions. And I am real excited because Dr. Jones does many similar interventions that we do also in practice. So do you want to talk some about the interventions? You want to go into best practices? Where do you want to go next?
I know there's so much.
I know it's so hard. Like I said, he did an amazing lecture. So this is all good stuff.
So Lexi sent me like, hey, listen, topics. I was like, dude, this is a 4-hour talk. This is insane. There's so many because he can branch off. And I really like it. And so obviously this may be a part 1, part 2 kind of podcast. That's me trying to get more time on your podcast right there. Splitting it up. Sprinkle. Okay. So one of the things I want to make sure we cover, and we've kind of said this methylation thing, a few things, is that, and I know you may get it from your patients too, but I think what the confusion comes in is like, we just throw out this word methylation kind of like freely. Methylation, MTHFR, great. But there is a difference between DNA methylation and cellular methylation, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about, when most people say methylation, you're thinking about these methylation processes that are happening in the cell. And basically what's happening is instead of transferring that methyl group to a DNA or, that that C molecule or that C, oh God, I'm drawing a blank here, that base pair of the, the cytosine. Did I say cytosine? Oh my God. And this is like, it's 7 o'clock in the morning where I'm out here and I'm just waking up and I haven't had my morning food, but it's okay. I'm hanging in here. So anyway, there's that. But again, when we talk cellular methylation, it's the transfer of that methyl group to a cell, right? Exactly. So essentially you're transferring it to various molecules rather. So like it's going to a protein, it's going to an RNA, it's going to a lipid, it's going to a neurotransmitter, right? And so essentially these methylation processes in the cell, they're actually regulating how you produce neurotransmitters and how you're, breaking down lipids or metabolizing your cholesterol and how your proteins are working. And we think about methylation of histones actually has some genetic, that's a whole, man, I'm going to go down these pathways here. And then DNA repair. And so essentially the methylation pathway, when we look at MTHFR, again, it could be a whole other podcast. In the big picture, kind of distilling it, it's that converting homocysteine to methionine and ultimately to SAMe. And that drives a lot of those methylation processes, right? This is why if you have someone with an MTHFR, they're not methylating properly, you got to intervene with some methylated B vitamins or some trimethylglycine or some glutathione, or there's all these other things, or even doing SAMe directly, right? And so we really have to tell people that the big difference to take away from all this little rambling I did is DNA methylation is about turning genes on and off, impacting or impacted by epigenetics. And then that cellular methylation is the cellular processes that we need to survive, making neurotransmitter and detoxifying and metabolizing things, right? So that's super important. And so I just want to kind of like touch on that, right? So make sure we know that. Now, then the other thing I want to go to, I'm going to try to keep this down. I know I'm only on the second one, telomeres. All right. So I want to just jump into that because I don't want to forget about that. And so telomeres, essentially, you have your chromosomes in there. Basically, as your hayflick lemon, your cells are going to divide so many times. Each division, the telomeres shorten. And so think of these telomeres. I like to think of it like, say you have a shoelace, and that shoelace is your chromosome. And at the end of that shoelace, there's a little plastic tip. Everyone has shoelaces, right? As you know, every time you tie your shoes over and over and over, eventually that plastic cap is going to fray, right? And when it frays, now that chromosome's exposed, right? That end of your shoelace is like fraying out. It's like, oh God, this is horrible. I need new shoelaces. Unfortunately, we don't get to make new shoelaces, right? But now the chromosome's exposed and it can be damaged by that oxidative stress, that inflammation, right? And so that telomere attrition, why that's important is those telomeres shorten, they actually impact these other hallmarks of aging, which I hope we get to senescence, and we hope to inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction, even how your body senses nutrients, right? And so going to testing, there are a few companies out there that actually can test your telomere length, right? And so it's a serum test. You do your blood draw, send it off. It goes to Europe. It takes forever to get it back, and it'll look at your short, medium, and long telomere length. And our goal is by all these interventions we're doing, whether it be looking at, hopefully we'll get into, I wish I meant to have Talon, but anyway, it may come back. The rumbling on the street, some of these peptides coming back, or you can look at a supplement called TA65, which is a really specialized astragalus root, and there's certain like, hey, intermittent fasting, all these cool things, right? And so really, it's like, hey, and it's something that I would like, hey, if I check your telomere length, it's like, I'm not checking this again for another year. It doesn't change that fast, right? And these are interventions you want to kind of keep an eye on, right? But if I do that test and I see these short telomeres, I'm like, okay, well, we really need to get into making sure your oxidative stress is reduced, right? Because again, if your telomeres are short, I know you're susceptible to oxidative stress. Are you sleeping, right? Are you decreasing inflammation? Like, are you keeping your diet under control, right? And so I think that's another big one too. I'm going to kind of tie these two in together a little bit because I always want to talk about, because everyone's into, and I hope we're going to springboard this. There's so many topics here, but I want to like talk about these next two. I'm going to combine them, and I hope we get to talk a little bit about rapamycin.
Yeah.
And so basically, there's two things. These two kind of come together. There's loss of proteostasis, and there's a disabled macroautophagy, right? And so proteostasis, essentially, when I think about it, is like you have when you think about DNA, RNA, they produce proteins, and proteins control all these cellular processes, right? Now, as we get older, these proteins, they're not meant to be forever. They are going to stop doing their thing. They may misfold. They may lose their stability. And now they're just kind of stuck there. They're not doing their thing, right? And then there's this concept of autophagy, where you have on a smaller level, where these are some more of the cellular components. So think of proteostasis, big proteins, macroautophagy, more of the smaller cellular processes, right? These are organelles. And so basically in both processes, they stop doing their thing. They're just kind of stuck there. and our body has to get rid of it, right? And so I always think about like, my analogy for that, you have an office building, during the day, you're making trash and the break room's all dirty, people dropping shit on the floor. And now your cleanup crew has to come in and your cleaning crew comes in the night and they take the trash out and they sweep the floor and we repeat this process, right? So, but if you're not doing that, if you're not getting autophagy happening, and this goes into some fasting things and some different supplemental things here, you're not clearing out that old cluttered junk in the office, right? And so that junk builds up and that causes inflammation and causes all these aging processes to accelerate, right? Now, that being said, unfortunately, there's really not a direct way to test autophagy, right? You can't say, how are you doing this or not? But there are strategies. This is something you should always be thinking about because this is why fasting is important, right? Or at least, and hopefully we get a little time to talk about that, is because this is the easiest, cheapest way to help with autophagy is to stop eating so much and all the time, right? Because your body, you look at some of the studies, it says it takes about 4 to 6 hours to go from eating a meal to getting to, hey, you're no longer building, you're in a state of getting into autophagy, right? And so, and that happens, okay, so fasting is a whole other thing, because there's so many concepts of fasting, it's like 16, 8, and 24 hours straight, and 24, and don't eat for 3 days, right? Okay, that can be tough. But I always tell people at the end of the day, fasting is good because when you're fasting, you're not in this, your body kind of exists in two states metabolically. You're either kind of building, storing, or breaking down and removing, right? And so, and this is controlled by a process called, a compound called mTOR, mammalian target rapamycin, right? And so when you eat a big meal, when you're in this building a protein stage, that mTOR is activated, right? When mTOR is activated, you ain't doing autophagy. Like your body's like, I'm building, I got all these nutrients, I got all these parts to the puzzle here. Let me put the puzzle together, right? But when you're in a fasting state or doing things to activate autophagy, you kind of get the time, your body's like, hey, let me clear all this old junk out, right?
Right.
And that's a good state to be in. But you don't want to be in that state forever because you want to build some muscle, right? You want to repair things, right? So there's this dance between activating mTOR and not activating mTOR or inhibiting it, right? And so that's kind of where, should I stop talking now? I've been going, man.
No. I think it's good. So I think that the big thing though, just you were hitting on it, is blocking mTOR. And then it's kind of like, when I think about it, it's like the opposite is activating AMPK. So it's kind of like, you can't be all one and you can't be all one on the other side. It's the dance and the flexibility between the two. That's kind of where the magic is made, is you can't always be upregulating something, right? For every action, there's a reaction. So I think that the blocking of the mTOR. The other thing that I think can sometimes get confusing is, well, should I take like should I take like sirolimus or rapamycin every day? No, just as Dr. Jones has said, is that you're trying to do it intermittently, kind of like intermittent fasting. On another pathway, some of the easiest things to do to activate AMPK, which can be also really helpful, is exercise, right? Like we can't stress that enough. Like that is the best medicine, is exercise, zone 2 training, walking with a purpose, resistance training, like all of those things I think are so, and they're so undervalued in the general population. And I think everyone comes in and they want all these cool peptides. I want rapamycin, I want MOTS-c, I want SS31. It's like, whoa, are you doing any exercise? Well, I was just going to take these supplements, or I was just going to take these peptides. So I was like, no. You gotta do some of this other stuff. So I think to your point, it's a balance. It's a balance between the two. How many more pathways we got?
A ton. So I'm going to do a little quick. We got a shitload. But I'll keep it I'll keep it high level. I know I'm diving in. I'll just kind of run.
Because I want to get to the peptides.
We got to get to the peptides. Got to get to the peptides here. If it ain't peptides, you ain't doing it right. Okay, so so getting into just kind of like speed rounding here, and obviously we think about nutrient sensing, and that gets just regulated how your body burns. Is it using carbs for energy, or restoring all that? If you can't. It's like having an automatic fuel gauge in a car. If your body doesn't know if I need to be storing or wasting or burning, and that can happen just through aging, a lot of different pathways too, and inflammation. Mitochondrial dysfunction, huge, right? And so everyone knows if you're taking a chemistry class or biochemistry or biology, mitochondrial organelles inside the cell, they produce energy, but they do so much more than energy. They regulate a lot of your oxidative stress pathways or your detox pathways. They or can be protective. We're talking about brain function, all these other different mitochondrial functions. But again, as we age, they get less efficient, or they break down, or they get into a state of mitochondrial, you want to call it, there should be a process of autophagy where you're getting rid of the old mitochondria. And if you're not doing that, they're just putting out this oxidative stress. And again, if you've been listening, oxidative stress is just really destroying everything, right? And I say oxidative stress and inflammation, if it seems foreign, inflammation is heat, oxidative stress, that's rust. Heat and rust, not good for your car, not good for your body, right? So you want to kind of think about that. And so this peptide, we'll get into the peptides, and then cellular senescence. Again, that's your zombie cells. People have been talking about senescence for the last few years. A lot of different processes are going to get you into senescence. But think about if your cells are senescent, they're not doing their job. And I talked about this at one of the conferences. It's like, you got this employee, man, he ain't working, but ain't nobody fired his ass yet. He's just sitting there taking up space, just talking, making everyone disgruntled. You got to get rid of him. You got to get rid of him. You got to fire him. We got to clear him out. He's to come to work the next day. Your desk is gone. I think that's a clue, right? And so, this senescence processes, the problem is they actually give off these SASPs or senescence associated secretory phenotypes that can make other cell senescence, give off inflammation. And then you've got inflammation, the big one, man. Inflammation, because inflammation drives all the other aging processes, right? And again, I always tell people, like, inflammation is not always the enemy. You need inflammation to heal.
You need some, right?
Yeah, you need inflammation when you get a cold, you get sick, inflammation gets you, but you don't survive without inflammation. It's when that inflammation doesn't turn off. When somehow the body's like, oh yeah, stay inflamed, right? And sometimes we drive that inflammation when you're eating a bunch of, I call it the McDonald's diet, right? That's your shake, fries, burger, right? And I guess apparently McDonald's is as expensive as restaurants now. I haven't been in years, but apparently that's a whole other thing. But that being said, these inflammatory processes, man, it's like sometimes we can drive them when you're not getting enough sleep, when you're in this high stress situation, when you're not giving yourself rest days from the gym. There's certain things that can make that inflammation worse, right? Mm-hmm. That's the one you mentioned, testing. That's where of all the markers and looking at testing, inflammation is one that can give you the most data. It's easy to get. You run a CRP, you mentioned the C-reactive protein. You mentioned, the sedimentation rate, which is more that chronic inflammation. You can run a ferritin, which is upregulated in inflammation. Your white blood cells, your neutrophils are upregulated in inflammation. You can see a higher homocysteine, right? Your vitamin D will be low because vitamin D, you're just zapping your vitamin D because it's like, hey, it's a pro-hormone. It's like, I need to get this inflammation down. And then you start lowering your vitamin D, right? Mm-hmm. You can see some of your cholesterol markers increase, right? And so that's one that you can really track and all that.
Yeah.
Dysbiosis, which I think a lot of people don't give enough light to, is because basically, and I know I've kind of seen some podcasts talking about gut health. Look, the gut is on all the axes: gut brain, gut skin, gut hormone, gut inflammation, and your gut controls it all. So if you have a crappy microbiome and it's like you have a fish tank, there's more. I think somewhere was like, there's more microbes in your gut than stars you can see in the sky. Mm-hmm. It's so billions and billions and billions, right? And if you have too much of one or not enough of another one, it disrupts that microbiome. It's like having a fish tank and it's like all piranhas. Mm-hmm. I got a whole lot of piranhas. I got a few goldfish in there. Guess what? The piranhas are eating the goldfish. Now you got all piranhas, right? Now you can't even do it. And so you want to make sure that's balanced here because, again, it affects your metabolism and your immune system function and leaky gut, all these crazy, crazy things, right? And so gut health drives aging. And I think a lot of people don't kind of put that connection together. But when we get into some of these peptides, inflammation, gut health, mitochondrial function, man, just straight rock stars, right?
Yeah.
I think that was a speed round. You're going to have to put me on 0.75 speed to get through that. But those are the ones.
That was good. Right? No, it was good. It was good. One thing I was going to mention, only because I know you do thyroid, a good amount of thyroid too, reverse T3 and looking at the free T3 versus the reverse T3 when their body's inflamed or they're under stress or there's something, right? Reverse T3 is a very inexpensive way to check that, right? So I think that's super, super helpful as well. I just wanted to mention that one. All right, let's get to the peptides. I know we're cutting close on time. I know you got shit to do. So, all right.
So I got one more.
Okay, let's do it.
I'm not done. I want to make sure. It's that's so much. I want to get it all.
I know.
So
I'm sorry.
we're going to do peptides, but I really want to kind of talk about some of the testing that if you're a clinician or if you're a patient, like real high level, what test can give you this information on these hallmarks of aging, right? We talked about the oxidative stress and DNA damage, the urinary OHDG. We talked about the biological age testing, the DNA methylation, right? Telomere length, there's tests out there like I think repeat something, life length, you know, and then I think the true age test has a telomere 1 in there too, I think. Senescence, right? And so there's some testing out there. You look at CD8 plus over CD828 negative, CD4 over CD8. And so that's really, it's hard to really test senescent directly, you know, but you can look at immune cells. There are some tests out there to look at, do you have a percentage of, I always look at when you do I think it's UCLA, they do this immunology testing where they look at all these different CD markers or cell markers. And obviously we can't get too far into it, but you can look at these markers, CD4 or CD8, et cetera, et cetera. You can look at, hey, from perspective of my immune cells, which you can kind of translate to the rest of the body, does my body have a lot of senescent cells? Does it have a lot of active cells? Good. Does it have a lot of cells kind of and I call it like the military. You got your boot camp, your active duty, your retirees, right? And so you look at this test and like, hey, I got these guys in boot camp. They're ready to take over for these cells once they retire. You got the active duty. Those are the ones that, hey, I'm roaming around, fighting off anything that needs to be fought off. Then you have the retirees. They're like, look, I'm just here collecting my check. Sometimes you got to go. That's probably bad. I'm a retiree. I don't want to go. I want my check every month. But eventually, you know, it's just having a lot of them. Kind of a bad analogy right there. So shout out to the veterans, including myself, man. Don't pull my check. And so then there's inflammation. Again, we talked about the CRP, sedimentation rate, IL-6, C4. There's a lot of them. It goes in there. Nutrient sensing, again, that's going to be your insulin, glucose, A1C. If those are off, if it's not dietary, something's off that needs to be corrected. Dysbiosis, there's a GI map, there's a GI 360, there's
doctor's data.
Yeah, so many.
Yeah, Genova, right? GI effects.
Yep. And then it goes down to heart. You're right, your cardiovascular health, right? And there's different, like the cardio IQ that Boston Health does, and I think you get it through Quest. And last but not least, I know you've talked about this a lot, is the hormones, right? Because the other one I didn't talk intracellular communication. I think hormones are the biggest one like that because that's another hallmark of aging. If your cells aren't communicating, they're not repairing themselves, they're not reducing all these other hallmarks, and hormones are the biggest one. If your hormones ain't talking, they're not binding to the cells, and that's why reverse T3 is really big on that too, and sex hormone binding globulin. You can have a ton of hormones, but if they're not getting where they need to be, they're not communicating. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000 testosterone, if you have an 8 free testosterone.
Right.
It ain't communicating, right? Sorry, I just flew through that. I'm sorry, I had to get through that.
That's good. It's good. All right. I know this is like our favorite. So, all right, let's go. Top 3 longevity peptides. What they are, what they do. Go.
Top 3 peptides for longevity, which is hard. Thanks for putting me in a box I don't like to be in. I am going to start with the GLP-1 agonists.
Oh, yeah,
that's one of my big ones, right? And I go with this because this is your semaglutides and your tirzepatides and your retatrutides or your cagrilentides as a whole. Even though the cagrilentides were an amylin analog, let's take that one out. And so these GLP-1 agonists, because why they're important for longevity is one, because they decrease metabolic inflammation or inflammation, right? And so decreasing the production of inflammatory proteins. Again, inflammation drives these longevity processes. They also upregulate AMPK, which Lex mentioned as well. And also, if you're not overeating, and again, this is more, and I don't want to get too far into dosing and all that, but for those people who have issues with appetite and overeating, again, if you're constantly eating and overeating, you're in this activation of mTOR state. You never get to autophagy. You never get there, right? And also regulating glucose and blood sugar. When you think about your phenotypical aging, keeping those numbers lower is going to help with that as well. So I think GLP-1s, and again, this is at the lower doses. I will never say microdose because I'm going to say this out loud for the crowd in the back. Semaglutide is not a mushroom. It's not ketamine. You ain't microdosing. This ain't fucking LSD. You're going to have to bleep me out. Bleep me out. Tell them I said it. Come see me. Come find me, man.
Chris asked me, he goes, what the hell is this microdosing? Man, I was like, Chris, I don't know.
You are not microdosing semaglutide. Argue with your mama because I'm not going to have this discussion with you. I'm just not. You are low dosing.
Yeah, I'm like maintenance dose, like a split dose. I don't know what a microdose is.
I just say it's just a low dose. I'm just putting you on a low dose, right? Anyway, so you can get a lot of the longevity benefits by doing a lower dose or low dosing it less than the standard protocol, what you do for, which are really high dosings, by the way, man. Like, I think the jumps they do, the standard dosing is why so many people are like, I lost 40 pounds in 2 months and my skin is sagging because you did too much. That's why you're vomiting and nauseous. You got all of stuff.
And you lost muscle.
Crazy times, right? So I would say the GLP-1s are big. The next one is, I think that the growth hormone releasing peptides, the GHRPs and growth hormone secretagogues, are amazing because they're so cellular protective, but they just they're so pleiotropic, is they're going to protect your heart. They're going to protect your bones. They're going to help you maintain your muscle. We didn't even get into myokines. That's a whole other process there. And so the GLP-1 growth hormone peptides do so much. And how many processes for anti-aging are implicated with deep sleep? If you're getting to that deep sleep, you're doing, that's when a lot of that, I talk about that trash in the body. Your longest period of not eating is when you sleep.
Right.
And so when you sleep, you get to do a lot of those cellular cleanup and detox pathways and getting rid of cellular waste and all that, right? I'm going to go, it's so hard. I am going to go with damn it. I got GLP-1s, I got the CJCs. I
know what your tie is between is a mitochondrial or VPC 157. I'm going to get
that. I got a 3-way tie. I got MOTS, VPC, and GHK-Copper, but I'm going to go GHK. I'm going to go GHK.
All right.
Because what I like, GHK, when you look at some of the studies on it, is it does have some DNA repair and protective properties. And I think that's because that copper ion that it donates and even can upregulate. Copper is what you need to make your superoxide demutase or dismutase. Superoxide dismutase. SOD. And your catalase, right? And so these are these antioxidant enzymes that your body needs to clear this out. So basically, this is why GHK copper, not only when you think about hair, skin, nails, I think about skin, oxidative stress is what gives you the wrinkles. If I decrease the oxidative stress, I'm improving, not only increasing that type 1 collagen, which is great for the GHK, but decreasing oxidative stress also helps with anti-aging, right? So I think the oxidative stress, the DNA repair, I love GHK copper for that. And it's anti-inflammatory, so I'm hitting different pathways. The BPC, PDA, that's going to be some of your inflammation. BPC has BDNF properties. And then obviously the MOTS-C, the mitochondrial peptides. Hopefully, shout out to MOTS-C. Hope you're coming back in December, right? And that's a whole other conversation. But until then, you have SS31. And you do have humanin, depends on like what part of the country you're in.
Yeah.
But these are also mitochondrial peptides. There's a guy who I'm saving for our podcast, who's an expert, and you're going to love this one. He's an expert in mitochondrial health, and he talks about the difference between SS31 and humanin and MOTS-C. And that's going to be really cool. I can't wait. I was going to do it myself, and I was like, I ain't smart enough for that. Let me bring an expert on it, right? And so again, these mitochondrial peptides, again, mitochondrial dysfunction is another, it's like inflammation. These mitochondrial dysfunction leads to all the other hallmarks, just like inflammation does. So you can improve mitochondrial function. I know you asked for 3. I gave you 3, A, B, and C.
So because I know I have a lot of patients listening, GHK-Cu copper is not available in injectable form any longer at this point. It is 1000% available as a topical, which works really, really well. And I'm actually trialing out topical GHK copper with rapamycin. In a compound. So I'll let you know, Greg, how that goes, because I do pretty medicine and you got one wrinkle on this face. So I will let you know. Another way that we use GHK is we use it with zinc thymulin in hair. So that is still available, because I know people are like, I heard your podcast. Can I still get you? Nope, you can't. MOTS-C is no longer available. So that is where SS31 comes into play on that. And that's what Dr. Jones was saying. CJC is available, CJC plus ipamorelin, which that one came back. So I just wanted to just mention that, because I know I have a lot of patients who listen and they're going to be on the horn like, Dr. Greg said this. But like, listen, Dr. Greg didn't put the disclaimer. Yeah, exactly. And that's what the goal. But I think it's always important. So speaking of peptides, Greg, let's talk a little bit about, sorry, go ahead. You got something.
One thing that I've heard on the radar is that GHK acetate is going to be back here, which is just the tripeptide. It doesn't have the copper attached. Now, back in the day, I had some compound pharmacies. I was like, I want GHK. Acetate. And I remember the first time I got GHK copper from Pure Pharmacy in Indiana, it was blue. And I was like, why is this shit blue?
Yeah.
And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I've been doing GHK. I never saw blue. But you're getting acetate, right?
Yeah.
So acetate just doesn't have the copper attached. So again, we will see when that comes out. Personally, I'm looking at some studies like, hey, if you take the GHK acetate and then take a copper supplement with it.
Yep.
That's what, that's how.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
I
That's
agree.
what I'm thinking. So more to follow on the
Yes.
GHK acetate. Hopefully by next month we'll have that, and we'll
Yes.
play around with it and see how it
Yeah.
goes. All right. Sorry,
Speaking of tweaking peptides to make shit work, let's talk a little bit. I know I got like 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna hurry. But
okay.
BPC inject, I didn't know if you had patients, but BPC injectable came taken away, but pentadoic arginate is available, and I've had some feedback on 3 patients. So not a large sample size. I'm not stupid, but not a large sample size. But the feedback has actually been very good as far as injectable for musculoskeletal, arthritis, injury, chronic joints. What has been your feedback?
Yeah, so PDA, and then I know we're speedballing here. It's pentadecapeptide arginate, PDA, not public display of affection. I know it could be confusing.
Yeah.
And so PDA is essentially pentadeca, 15 amino acids, right? And so essentially it is very, very similar to BPC 157, except I believe like they have an arginate attached somewhere where before it was like an acetate or something like that.
Right.
I'm not a biochemist, don't judge me here, but so essentially it has a lot of similar properties as in kind of activating that paxillin pathway, which is how it upregulates collagen for healing injuries and tendons. But the biggest thing is it's also anti-inflammatory and also reduces pain. Now, I love me some BPT 157, man. I do. And I feel this is blasphemous, but I think from what I've seen, a little bit of bigger sample size is that it has been a little bit more faster acting and reducing pain and helping people heal to the point where it's just like, people are like, oh, I did not expect that to work so fast. I've only had one person, I think they're just their injury's so bad. They're like, I don't really felt anything. Like, yeah, it's probably because that's been injured for 15 years. It wasn't going to fix itself in 30 days, right? So again, we are seeing great results with that, doing the pentadeca or PDA as an alternative to the BPC. I still think oral BPC is still available for gut health. I'm still learning oral BPC for gut health. I just think for people that are looking for recovery from workouts, look for injury recovery, decreased pain, inflammation, I think PDA is a great alternative. Like we're all in on PDA around here, especially seeing the results. And I don't know, man, if BPC 157 comes back, that's going to be a hard decision, right?
It is.
Because
Yeah.
like,
no, I agree.
shit.
I agree. I'm super pumped about it though. Super pumped about
Well, we
it.
may be able to look at it like, hey, depending case by case, if you're just straight pain, I might say, hey, let's do the PDA. If you're like, I got some pain, I got some autoimmune, I got some gut health stuff.
My hair's thinning.
Yeah, let's do the BPC, right? So I think it gives us more options as a practitioner too, right? So I don't think it has to be one or the other. It's one or the other or both with an asterisk, right?
Yeah, totally. I agree. So we have all these amazing peptides. Greg, can people just get it online? What do you think about that?
Oh, they can. I wouldn't. You can buy anything online. Shit.
Exactly.
You know
So I know you. And you and I kind of chatted about this. I know, we put a lot of free education out into the universe. That's kind of like our give back to the medical community because we love to educate. That's what we do. That's why we're friends. But I think sometimes I don't want it to be misconstrued as medical advice.
No,
always check with your provider. If you want to work with us, there's a wait list, but you can always get on it. But I think the thing to remind yourself is if you're not a clinician, you need to be monitored by somebody who is familiar with these peptides and that their dosing is appropriate. And not only that the quality of testing is there and that it's a legit source, inspected by the Board of Pharmacy or however their sterility and testing and all that. You know way more than I do about that. But can you speak just a little bit on that piece of it, Greg?
Yeah. And I want to make sure I kind of finish that piece off of like, you can get this stuff online, but you should not. And again, because you can go Google the peptides we talked about, go buy it and all that stuff, but it is going to say not for human use and for research only. And that being said, the process when you speak to actual chemists and some even going, compound pharmacies too, actually speaking to people that have spoken to some of the producers of that the pharmacies get their peptides from, because I want to know more. Because this is important, and it's just there's a certain process of producing peptides. It's dirty. Like there's a lot of heavy metals, a lot of chemicals that are produced, and we think about TFAs or these tetrafluoride, or something acids. Sorry, it's early, and you don't, this process again. It's like when you get these research peptides, they'll say purity, like it's a peptide, it's potency, it's it, but it's like what is the, are there any microbes in there? Is it clean? And again. if it has some of these chemicals in it, they may not show you if you ask for a COA. That TFA it's hepatotoxic.
Right.
And I have literally had patients take peptides online, research peptides, and their liver enzymes are through the roof because you're taking something that's not clean and all these sourcings are not the same. So that's number one. Like, it's just not, and it's just like it says research don't put in the body. Like, well, anyway, that's a whole other thing, right?
Yeah.
The other thing to that is that when it comes to working with the provider is because you want to make sure that not all these, and we say peptides are safe because, they're bioidentical, but at the end of the day, the dosing matters and how you take it matters and how long you take it matters. How many people have you seen that were doing peptides online? It's like, oh, I'm doing testosterone. Well, okay, I got it online. How long have you been taking it? Oh, 2 years now. No breaks? Nope, 2 years. You're like, okay, insane. And also there are side effects of doing so much of these peptides, of doing too many of them, right? So knowing how to dose. Now, that being said, importance of working with the practitioners because one, just because you see a dose online doesn't mean the dose is right for you. It counts for your body weight and your conditions and your symptoms and everything else, right? And also making sure like, hey, you know what? I'm going to tell you how to use it, how to properly use it, how to safely use it. That's what we're trained to do. It's like, I always think that, and again, I ain't trying to be facetious, man, or pretentious, but like, we went to school for this, man. Like, we
continue to go to it. We continue to do it. That's how we became friends, is we continue to learn.
Dude, I got 4 plaques on my wall for peptide certifications. You know what I'm saying? I take this serious. I didn't just like Google this and say this is how you dose it. And I think it's important to find a doctor who's been trained in it because you're able to look at all the good things and all the bad things, how to do it. And you know what? Like, yeah, you can Google it, but let me tell you something, man. I wouldn't Google how, and this is an extreme example. I probably wouldn't like, oh man, my patient, damn. Oh, they got 98% plaque. Let me Google that and tell you how to fix this 98% plaque. This block isn't hard. I'm going to send you to someone who's trained in that and knows how to treat it effectively and efficiently because, again, I want you to get better and be safe, right? And so I don't think, there's a lot of great information on the internet. You can learn a lot, but I think if you want to do this the right way, you want to work with a doctor who knows their peptides, who knows how to use them, who knows how to use them together synergistically. And certain things you ain't going to find online.
I agree.
Only comes from that clinical experience, right?
Absolutely. And being able to read research and clinical application. I think the last little piece that I'd like to kind of touch on, just as you really did a great job talking about, is, for like a second there for a week, we couldn't get tirzepatide, right? There was this big hoopla. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of us, I've been like, it sucks, but I was not that worried about it. I really wasn't that worried about it. And I'm in a lot of Facebook groups and I mentor and people are freaking out. And yeah, it sucks. It sucks. It reminds me of last October when all the other shit was taken away, right? But I think for those of us who really understand cell signaling, other mechanisms, other ways to mimic those same effects, like, okay, it's another opportunity for me to be innovative and learning some other tools. And I truly think that as time will tell with, things coming off of national back order, this is really going to be the separator. Who really understands this medicine and who's just jabbing someone in the belly and calling it a day? You know what I mean? Like, I hate to say that because I'm glad that there's more awareness about it, but we've been doing peptides before semaglutide happened. And we're going to continue to do it even when semaglutide goes away. So I think that's a really important piece.
Yeah, I didn't hear any lies there. I heard no lies. And so the thing is like, and we saw the same thing and I was like, yeah, let's not panic. At the end of the day, you know what? And I say this, relatively frequently, man, I didn't go to, I'm not a PD. I'm not a doctor of peptides. I'm a doctor of naturopathic medicine. So like, we have to be able to look at the entire picture. It's great. It's great that we've got this amazing tool, but we were helping people get better. You were a nurse practitioner before semaglutide and tirzepatide came out, and we're still helping people. And there's so many other great things out there to do, and you have to pivot and learn. There's always changes and there's always new things, right? And that's why us looking at the research, going to conferences, speaking to like mentors, shout out to Dr. Suzanne, man, just an amazing doc, hanging out with Dr. Turner. It's just free. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Free. It's okay.
Edit that shit. Pause.
Okay.
Man, shout out to Dr. Fareed, man, just an amazing doctor and stuff. I had her on the podcast, and so like getting that education, speaking to doctors who've been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years. That's the separator right there.
Absolutely.
And so I think you hit it right on the head with that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. This was so good, Greg. Thank you so much. We're going to have you back. I mean, we'll just maybe like once a quarter. Once a quarter. Greg's got a standing slot. Once a quarter, we got to get Greg on.
Let me tell you something here. I'm going to go over all the things that I was like, oh, I want to talk about that I didn't talk about. I want to talk about this. This is how crazy this was. All right. I was like making notes as we were going. All right. We didn't talk about diet. We didn't talk about the Mediterranean diet, intermittent fasting, the DASH diet, the alternative health. What's it? AHEI 2010. It's the alternative health something. Yeah. That diet has a lot of research on decreasing epigenetic aging, and it's like definitely look into that. And it's basically like I think it's like 5 servings of fruit. 5 veggie, 4 fruit, certain amount of grains, and all that stuff. Yeah. You'll take a look at that. That was a great one. We didn't get to go into that. We didn't talk about epitalon. We didn't talk about TA1. I had that on my notes, man. I had a whole section like we got to talk about rapamycin. We touched on it.
I know. We'll do a whole episode digging metformin. I know. I wanted to talk about fatty 15. I want to talk about cold plunging. I want to talk about ozone. I want to talk about methylene blue. Listen, it's okay. Like I said, once a quarter. Greg's got. You heard it here first. Greg's got a standing seat on this podcast because it's good. Like it's such good information. But just as this is an example, it's a lot of information, and to really understand it, it takes time. It takes time. And I always say it's expensive to be smart, whether it's taking time away from patients to do these types of things. It's money that you're not generating, but we're doing our part in building a great community of patients who are empowered and educated and who can advocate for themselves and continuing to educate clinicians. So thank you so much, Greg, for taking the time to do this. This was so good. Like I said, we're going to get you scheduled to get it on again. Any final closing thoughts? Where can people find you, Greg?
Yeah. I am on Instagram under Dr. Jones _Dr. Jones, all spelled out. Our clinic is Innovative Wellness Center. So with an E, so ENOVATIVE, wellnesscenter.com. The podcast is on YouTube and Spotify. Like Lexi said earlier, it's the Dr. Jones Optimization Academy pod. It's such a long name. I got to change the name. But anyway, so Optimization Academy, look up, find us. And just, hopefully we'll, any questions, reach on out. We are not answering medical questions online. So let me stop that now.
Don't DM us. We're not answering sourcing questions, not dosing questions. You can book a consult. You can get on a wait list.
Shut that shit down right now. You know what I'm saying? So it's great to have the questions and to seek information, but also know, and this is the part I like to say, there is a reason, the big reason why when you ask, hey, how do I dose this? How do I take this? What should I do? Because the minute I tell you or Lexi tells you what to do, we are not liable for that. So if you take something and you have a reaction and you're sitting in the ER, who told you to take that? Dr. Jones DM'd me, I'm on the hook.
Yeah.
I don't have consent to treat you. I do not have, so anything we say to you like that is, I'm treating. If I tell you how to dose something, I just treated you.
Yeah.
And I like my license.
Yeah.
I like that.
Agreed.
We're not playing around. Sorry, I just had the one last.
No, I agree. You
can take that out. That's shot.
No,
fired.
we're leaving it in there.
No. So and so, man, look forward to coming back on the show. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you, Lexi, as always. And man, let's do this again.
Awesome.